The corridor on the fourth floor of Meridian General Hospital smelled the same every morning: antiseptic, floor wax, and something faintly floral that no one could ever trace to its source. Rosa Mendez could have told them. It came from the single lavender spray she kept inside her cart, the one small thing she had added 6 years ago because she believed sick people deserved to wake up to something that felt alive. Nobody had ever noticed. Nobody had ever asked. Rosa had kept spraying it anyway, every morning at 5:47 a.m. before the first doctors arrived and the hallways filled with the weight of other people's emergencies. She had worked at Meridian General for 11 years. She knew every wing, every supply closet, every shortcut between the cardiac ward and the neonatal unit. She knew which elevator doors stuck on cold mornings, which patients on floor 6 liked the blinds left half open, and which nurses preferred the break room mopped before their shift rather than after. She had learned these things not because anyone had asked her to, but because Rosa Mendez had always believed that the people who held a place together were rarely the ones whose names appeared on the walls. Before we continue, if you believe that dignity belongs to every person regardless of their title or their uniform, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Loyal Hearts, and share it with someone who still believes that quiet people can change the world. Tell us where you're watching from today. Leave your city in the comments, because this community reaches every corner of the earth, and every comment reminds us that compassion is never truly rare. Rosa had grown up in a small house on the east side of the city with her mother, her younger brother, and a kitchen table that always had one chair too many because her father had left before she was old enough to understand why. Her mother cleaned offices at night and made tamales on Sunday mornings, and she told Rosa 2 things every single day without fail. The first was that no work done with honest hands was ever beneath a person's dignity. The second was that money was only as good as what you built with it. Rosa had carried both lessons like a second spine for 52 years. She had never gone to medical school. She had never worn a white coat or earned a title that made strangers treat her differently in elevators. What she had done, quietly and without announcement over the course of 20 years, was save. Every spare dollar from every shift, every year, deposited into an account she had opened when her brother survived a heart surgery that nearly bankrupted their family. She had watched the hospital staff save his life with equipment the waiting room fundraiser poster said they desperately needed. She had made a decision that afternoon in the corridor outside the cardiac unit, still wearing her coat, still smelling of the factory where she worked double shifts at the time. She had decided she would give back exactly what that building had given her family. Not someday. Specifically and completely. It had taken 19 years. It had taken 19 years. Daniel Voss had been appointed Chief Operating Officer of Meridian General 8 weeks before the morning everything broke open. He was 37, Harvard-educated, and visibly impatient with anything that could not be measured on a dashboard. He had reorganized the supply chain in his first week, eliminated 2 administrative positions in his second, and arrived at the hospital earlier and earlier each morning as though the building itself needed to be reminded who was in charge. He had walked past Rosa 17 times without acknowledging her existence. She had counted, not out of resentment, but the way a person counts things when they are paying careful attention to what the world decides to see. The morning it happened, Daniel was walking fast through the 4th-floor corridor toward the surgical suite when Rosa stepped out from the supply room with her cart, inadvertently blocking the hallway for exactly 3 seconds while she positioned the door latch. Daniel stopped. He looked at the cart, then at Rosa, then at the small group of medical residents walking behind him who had frozen mid-conversation. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough that the sound carried through the corridor in both directions. He told her this was a professional medical facility, not a storage yard. He told her she was creating safety hazards in critical access corridors, and that it was exactly this kind of carelessness that slowed down care. Then he said something that settled into the air of the hallway like something permanent. He told her that she was a mop and a bucket, and that she needed to act like it, and that if he found her blocking a corridor again, he would make sure she had a great deal more time to think about her position. He told the residents to follow him and walked away. Rosa did not cry. She stood beside her cart with her hands resting on the handle and looked at the floor for a moment. Then she looked up. The residents who had witnessed it kept their eyes down. A nurse at the far end of the corridor turned and walked in the other direction. A patient in a wheelchair who had heard everything through his open doorway met Rosa's eyes and shook his head slowly with an expression she recognized immediately. It was the same expression her mother had worn whenever the world reminded them of where they stood. Rosa went back to work, and paid. All the find and Asian on the martyrs, from of ward to the Savior. What Daniel Voss did not know, what almost no one inside Meridian General knew, was that 3 floors below that corridor, in the hospital's main conference room, the board of directors was finalizing the public announcement they had been preparing. For 6 months, for 2 decades, the Rosa Mendez Foundation had directed contributions to Meridian General under a standing anonymity agreement negotiated by her attorney, a childhood friend who had become one of the city's quietest and most respected legal minds. The foundation had funded the cardiac imaging wing, the neonatal intensive care expansion, and most recently, the surgical robotics program that had been celebrated at a national conference 3 weeks prior. The board had finally received Rosa's permission to lift the anonymity. She had agreed only because her doctor had told her that her own health was beginning to require the kind of care the hospital now provided, and she thought it was time to stop protecting a secret that had cost her nothing to keep except the comfort of being known. The announcement was scheduled for 11 o'clock. At 10:58, a hospital communications officer mounted the digital display boards in every major corridor and the main lobby. At 11, the board chairman's voice came through the building intercom with the kind of careful formality that made everyone in earshot stop what they were doing. Daniel Voss was signing a budget approval in his office when his assistant opened the door without knocking. She set a printed sheet on his desk and pointed at the corridor screen visible through his glass wall. The display showed a photograph, Rosa, younger, standing outside the hospital's original entrance, beside the words, Rosa Mendez. Founding donor, 20 years of anonymous giving. Meridian General Hospital honors the woman who built our future. The budget approval sat unsigned, which the nation Ted, B's, or others, of course, and process. The story of what Daniel had said in the 4th floor corridor had already traveled the way hospital stories always traveled, fast and without permission, through break rooms and nurse stations and patient families waiting in chairs. By the time the board chairman appeared at the entrance of Rosa's current corridor to personally escort her to the announcement ceremony, there were already people lining the hallway on both sides, not because anyone had organized it. Because the building itself seemed to understand that something needed to be witnessed. Rosa walked to the ceremony in her uniform. She had been offered a change of clothes and had politely declined. She told the board chairman that she had always believed a person's worth was not in what they wore, but in what they chose to do when no one was looking. She said she hoped the hospital would continue being a place where that belief was practiced at every level, from the boardroom to the supply closet. Daniel Voss submitted his resignation the following morning. The board accepted it without a counteroffer. Rosa's anonymous years ended that November, but the lavender spray stayed on the 4th floor corridor cart. The nurse who took over Rosa's former shift found it on her first morning and asked the supply manager what it was for. The supply manager thought about it for a moment and then said he honestly wasn't sure, but that it had always been there, and that the patients on floor 4 always seemed to breathe a little easier than anywhere else in the building. He told her to keep spraying it, and she did. If this story reminded you that the most powerful people in any room are not always the ones speaking the loudest, please like this video, share it with someone who has ever been looked past, and subscribe to Loyal Hearts. Your support is how stories like Rosa's reach people who may need to hear them tonight. Before you leave, tell us in the comments, what is one word you believe every person deserves, regardless of their job title? And as O fathers, Because the best stories are not the ones we watch. They are the ones we carry with us after the screen goes dark.